2013, the Rachmaninoff Vespers is like one of the pinnacle piece of the Orthodox.
In 1987, a fisherman trolling the English Channel pulled something heavy from the depths. Tangled in his line was twisted aircraft debris. Old, corroded, unmistakably wartime. He reported it, only to be told to throw it back. World War II wreckage, they said. Leave it alone. For decades, the moment faded into memory. But years later, the fisherman saw a photograph that stopped him cold. The plane looked exactly like the one he'd seen beneath the water. It was the same model flown by Glenn Miller, the legendary bandleader who vanished without a trace in 1944. No wreckage had ever been found, no confirmed crash site. And yet, this debris matched the timeline, the location, and the aircraft type. If true, it meant the mystery might have been solved long ago, ignored by history. And that raised a disturbing question. If the evidence was always there, what really happened to Glenn Miller on his final flight? Long before the mystery, before the fame, before the war, he was born Alton Glenn Miller in Clarinda, Iowa. Quiet, unassuming. No one could have predicted he'd become the sound of an entire generation. During his teenage years, he adopted the name Glenn with a double N, a change that later appeared inconsistently across records, school yearbooks, legal documents, even military files. Sometimes he was Glenn, other times just G. That detail would later complicate official investigations into his disappearance. But back then, it was just a young man shaping an identity. He worked farm jobs, milked cows, and saved every dollar until he could afford a battered trombone. Music wasn't a dream. It was an escape. And once he picked up that instrument, there was no turning back. What started as a small-town ambition would soon collide with global history. By high school, Miller wasn't just musical, he was everywhere. Football field, yearbook office, school orchestra. He played cornet, mandolin, anything he could get his hands on. But the trombone stayed closest. When his family moved to Colorado, his confidence grew. Performances energized him in ways classrooms never could. By the time he graduated in 1921, he already knew the truth. This wasn't a hobby. It was his life. That certainty followed him to the University of Colorado, where reality hit hard. He skipped classes to chase auditions, failed harmony, barely passed anything, and then came the moment of clarity. Academia was a dead end. Music wasn't optional, it was inevitable. Dropping out wasn't failure, it was commitment. And that decision would quietly alter American music forever. New York City became Miller's proving ground. He studied the Schillinger system obsessively, breaking music down into patterns, structures, and emotion triggers. This wasn't instinct, it was calculation. During this period, he composed a melody that felt different, slower, dreamlike. It was originally called Miller's Tune. Later, it would be renamed Moonlight Serenade. That song didn't just define his career, it defined an era. But success didn't come instantly. Touring bands chewed him up. Bigger stars took his solos. Rejection followed him city to city. And yet, those setbacks revealed something critical. Miller wasn't meant to shine at the front of the stage. He was meant to shape the sound itself. Arrangement, precision, control. That realization became his weapon. By the late 1920s, Miller was everywhere and nowhere. He freelanced constantly, wrote arrangements for rising stars, even co-wrote music with names who would later eclipse him. He married his college sweetheart, Helen, grounding himself while his career stayed uncertain. His first attempt at leading a band collapsed in failure. Crowds didn't care. Promoters weren't impressed. The disappointment nearly broke him. But instead of quitting, Miller went back to the drawing board. He began experimenting, layering clarinet over saxophones, shaping a sound no one else was using. It was risky, unproven, but when it worked, it was unmistakable. And soon, audiences wouldn't need an introduction to know whose band they were hearing. They could feel it instantly. What Miller didn't know was that this sound, this identity, would follow him all the way to his final flight. After the failure of his first band, Miller refused to chase trends. Instead, he dissected them. Big bands were everywhere in the late 1930s, all loud, fast, and fighting for attention. Miller went the opposite direction. He slowed things down. He layered sounds with surgical precision. The breakthrough came when he paired a lead clarinet with a tenor sax, playing the same melody an octave below, while the remaining saxophones filled the harmony tightly underneath. It shouldn't have worked, but it did. The result was warm, haunting, and instantly recognizable. When saxophonist Wilbur Schwartz joined, Miller made a bold choice. Schwartz wouldn't lead on sax at all. He'd play clarinet instead. That decision changed everything. Audiences didn't need to hear a band announcement anymore. Within seconds, they knew. This wasn't noise. This was identity. And suddenly, the man who once blended into the crowd had a sound that couldn't be mistaken for anyone else's. By late 1938, the gamble paid off. Miller signed with Bluebird Records, a subsidiary of RCA Victor, and the response was immediate. Ballrooms that once overlooked him were now booking weeks in advance. The Meadowbrook Ballroom in New Jersey became a turning point, followed by an explosive run at Glen Island Casino in New York. Crowds broke attendance records. Radio stations took notice. Jukeboxes couldn't keep up with demand. In 1939, his records flooded the country. Time magazine noted that his music was among the most played in America. When Tuxedo Junction dropped, it sold over 100,000 copies in a single week. That kind of success wasn't luck, it was domination. Miller had cracked the code. He didn't just entertain people, he gave them comfort, familiarity, a feeling they didn't realize they were craving. With success came scrutiny. Jazz purists dismissed Miller's sound as too clean, too controlled, too commercial. They accused him of sacrificing artistry for popularity. Miller didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He simply kept going. "I don't want a jazz band," he said bluntly. He knew exactly who he was playing for. While critics complained, audiences kept growing. Carnegie Hall welcomed him alongside legends. His band dominated radio waves with weekly broadcasts sponsored by Chesterfield cigarettes. Families built routines around listening. Soldiers-to-be memorized melodies before ever wearing uniforms. Miller understood something few others did. Music didn't need chaos to move people. It needed clarity. And that clarity made him unavoidable, whether critics liked it or not. Hollywood soon followed the numbers. Miller and his orchestra appeared in major studio films, blending swing music with big screen glamour. Sun Valley Serenade showcased not just his sound, but his presence. Controlled, confident, unmistakably American. Audiences didn't just hear his music anymore, they saw it. The band returned for Orchestra Wives, pulling back the curtain on life behind the spotlight. It was a polished image, but grounded enough to feel real. Miller was now everywhere: records, radio, movies, ballrooms. Yet behind the scenes, something was shifting. While others enjoyed the success, Miller seemed restless. Fame hadn't satisfied him, and the world beyond music was about to demand his attention. In 1942, at the absolute height of his career, Miller made a move no one expected. He walked away from packed venues, away from radio contracts, away from an income that dwarfed most entertainers of the era. While others chased security, Miller chose uncertainty. War was spreading, and he believed his music could serve a larger purpose. At 38 years old, married, famous, and exempt from the draft, he volunteered. Not for publicity, not for appearances, but to rebuild military music from the inside. Many thought it was temporary, a symbolic gesture. They were wrong. This wasn't a pause in his career. It was a point of no return. And once he stepped into uniform, everything that followed, every broadcast, every flight, every risk, would lead him closer to a mystery the world is still trying to solve. In September 1942, Glenn Miller stood behind a microphone for what would become his final civilian broadcast. There were no dramatic speeches, no hints of what was coming, just music flowing as it always had. When the show ended, he quietly handed leadership duties to Harry James and walked away from a career most entertainers would never dare abandon. What made this moment unsettling wasn't the goodbye. It was how unnoticed it felt. No one imagined this was the last time they'd hear him as a civilian. And that raises a haunting question. Did Miller already sense his future was about to change forever? Before we continue, take a second to like and subscribe if you enjoy deep dive stories that uncover the truth behind history's biggest mysteries. And here's something to think about. Would you have walked away from everything at the peak of your success, knowing the risks ahead? Because once Miller put on that uniform, there was no turning back. At 38 years old, Glenn Miller didn't fit the image of a wartime recruit. He needed glasses. He was married. He earned more in a week than most officers earned in a year. And yet, he was determined to serve. His first attempt to join the Navy failed due to political backlash over celebrity commissions. It had nothing to do with him personally, but the door slammed shut anyway. Most would have stopped there. Miller didn't. He pivoted to the Army, pitching a radical idea. Modernize military music. Replace rigid marches with music that actually moved people. Generals were skeptical until they saw the impact. Miller wasn't asking to entertain. He was asking to rebuild morale itself. Once commissioned, Miller wasted no time pushing boundaries. Traditionalists hated it. Jazz didn't belong in uniform, they said. But Miller understood something the rulebook didn't. Soldiers needed familiarity, not formality. He reorganized military bands, recruited elite musicians, and created a hybrid sound blending swing, popular music, and orchestral discipline. The result wasn't just entertaining, it was powerful. Troops listened, spirits lifted, resistance faded. His radio program I Sustain the Wings reached millions, turning music into a strategic tool. Quietly, Glenn Miller became one of the most effective morale officers in the war. By 1944, the conflict was no longer distant. The Allied invasion of Europe loomed, and top commanders wanted Miller's band closer to the action. He was transferred overseas, first to England, where danger was constant. V-1 flying bombs struck London daily. In one chilling moment, a bomb hit the building Miller's band had occupied just days earlier, killing over 100 people. Everyone survived only because they'd already moved. Miller called it Miller luck. But near misses like that don't feel like luck forever. They feel like warnings. In England, Miller's role expanded beyond concerts. His broadcasts reached occupied Europe. Some were delivered in phonetic German. Others were aimed directly at enemy troops. This wasn't entertainment anymore. It was psychological warfare. Rumors quietly followed him. Why was a band leader trusted with such access? Why was his movement increasingly restricted? And why were his orders becoming less clear? As plans formed to move the band to France, Miller grew restless. Delays frustrated him. Time mattered. And when an unexpected flight opportunity appeared, he made a decision that would place him in the sky on one of the most dangerous days of the war. By mid-1944, Glenn Miller was no longer just a band leader in uniform. In England, his orchestra had become an essential part of the Allied war machine. They broadcast constantly, day and night, into Britain, across occupied Europe, and even deep into Germany. Soldiers packed into halls whenever the band performed. Commanders noticed the effect immediately. Morale spiked, fatigue eased, fear softened. But the danger around them was relentless. V-1 flying bombs screamed overhead daily, striking neighborhoods without warning. One blast hit Miller's former London quarters shortly after the band relocated, killing more than 100 people. Everyone he knew understood how close they'd come. Miller brushed it off, half joking about Miller luck. Yet those around him sensed something else. He'd become quieter, more focused, almost urgent. Music was still his mission, but now it felt like time itself was chasing him. As the war intensified, so did Miller's responsibilities. His broadcasts became sharper, more strategic. Some were designed specifically for enemy ears, encouraging doubt and exhaustion among German troops. He even delivered short announcements in phonetic German, a detail that raised eyebrows. Why him? Why trust a famous civilian-turned-officer with messages that sensitive? Behind the scenes, Miller worked alongside intelligence-linked personnel and broadcasters with classified clearances. Nothing was ever stated outright, but whispers followed him. Some believed his music unit was being used as cover for something else. Others insisted it was coincidence. Still, his movements became restricted, his orders more direct, his schedule less transparent. The band was no longer just playing for soldiers. It was operating within the machinery of war, and that machinery was about to move them again. By November 1944, Miller was determined to relocate his unit to France. Paris had been liberated, and he believed broadcasting from there would bring music closer to wounded soldiers and frontline troops. But preparations lagged. Facilities weren't ready. Logistics stalled. Miller grew increasingly frustrated. Delays meant lost broadcasts, lost momentum. To compensate, the band was ordered to pre-record nearly 80 hours of material, an exhausting task layered on top of constant performances. Meanwhile, higher command approved a preliminary move. Miller would fly ahead to Paris to finalize arrangements personally. It was meant to be routine. Instead, it placed him on a tight timeline under mounting pressure. Weather worsened, flights were grounded, and patience ran out. On December 15, 1944, Miller was scheduled to fly from England to Paris. The flight was cancelled due to thick fog and dangerous visibility. Any other officer might have waited. Miller didn't. He was introduced to an alternative, a small Norseman aircraft making the trip anyway. The plane wasn't officially authorized for his travel. His orders didn't cover it. Even the pilot expressed concern. Miller hesitated. He disliked flying. He asked about parachutes. There were none. Someone joked, asking if he wanted to live forever. Against regulation? Against instinct? Against the weather? Miller boarded. The aircraft lifted off into heavy cloud cover and vanished. No distress call, no wreckage. Just silence. The timing couldn't have been worse. The next morning, the Battle of the Bulge erupted, plunging Allied command into chaos. A missing plane carrying 3 men didn't register immediately. Days passed before anyone realized Miller was gone. Searches found nothing. No oil slicks, no debris, no bodies. The official explanation blamed weather, mechanical failure, or pilot error. But without evidence, every conclusion felt hollow. How could someone so famous disappear so completely? As weeks turned into months, theories multiplied. Friendly fire, secret missions, cover-ups. The mystery hardened into legend. And with no grave, no wreckage, and no final answer, Glenn Miller became something rare in history. Not just lost, but unresolved. When military investigators finally turned their attention to Glenn Miller's disappearance, the conclusion arrived quickly and quietly. The official report cited bad weather, poor visibility, and the possibility of mechanical failure. Fog had grounded flights across the region. Freezing temperatures could have caused ice buildup on the wings. The Norseman aircraft itself had a reputation for carburetor issues that could choke an engine mid-air. Combined with the pilot's limited experience flying solely by instruments, the explanation sounded reasonable. Too reasonable. There were no eyewitnesses officially recorded, no debris recovered, no crash site identified. The report closed the case without answering the most unsettling question. How could a plane vanish over one of the most heavily traveled wartime routes without leaving a single confirmed trace? For Miller's family, the conclusion felt incomplete. For historians, it felt rushed. And for those who knew the conditions that day, it felt like a convenient answer designed to move on rather than dig deeper. Years later, a far darker theory emerged, one that reframed the disappearance as a tragic accident caused not by weather, but by friendly fire. On the same day Miller vanished, hundreds of Allied bombers were returning from an aborted mission over Germany. Dense fog forced them to turn back, still carrying live bombs. Over the English Channel, crews followed protocol and jettisoned their payloads into designated dump zones. One navigator later recalled seeing a small aircraft flying far below their formation, struggling in the haze. Moments later, he watched it flip violently and plunge into the sea. No report was filed. They were over friendly waters. No enemy contact. Decades passed before the memory resurfaced, and when it did, the date, time, and location aligned disturbingly well with Miller's flight path. Critics challenged the account, citing altitude differences and visibility limits. Supporters argued that fog, confusion, and wartime chaos made mistakes inevitable. If true, it meant Miller wasn't lost to fate, but to his own side's bombs, erased by protocol and silence. Then came the claims that threatened to turn the mystery into scandal. In the 1990s, a German journalist alleged that Glenn Miller never died in the Channel at all. According to this version, he made it to Paris and died quietly from a heart failure in a brothel, his death supposedly covered up to protect morale and reputation. The story exploded, then collapsed just as fast. The journalist recanted, admitting he had no documents and may have been misquoted. Still, the rumor refused to die. Why hadn't Miller's disappearance been announced for days? Why were records so thin? Why did intelligence-linked figures surround his final movements? None of it proved foul play, but none of it erased doubt either. As theories piled up, one truth remained unchanged. Glenn Miller's final hours were clouded by secrecy, haste, and decisions made under pressure. And when history leaves gaps like that, speculation rushes in to fill them. For decades, Glenn Miller's disappearance remained frozen in theory. Then, quietly, a detail resurfaced that shifted everything. In 1987, an English fisherman trolling the Channel snagged metal debris from the seabed. It was clearly aircraft wreckage, aged, corroded, unmistakably wartime. When he reported it, authorities told him to discard it. World War II wrecks were treated as war graves, best not to interfere. The fisherman complied, but he never forgot the shape of what he'd seen. Years later, after viewing photographs of Miller's missing Norseman aircraft, the realization hit him hard. The debris matched. Same structure, same proportions, same era. He even remembered the approximate location where he'd thrown it back. In 2019, aircraft recovery experts reviewing the account found it credible. Only one Norseman had gone missing in that area during the war. Miller's. If the wreckage still rests there, it could finally confirm what theories never could. But time works against truth. Currents shift. Metal erodes. Evidence disappears. What may have been the answer lay unseen for decades, resting silently beneath the waves while the world argued above it. In March 1945, Glenn Miller's wife, Helen, stood quietly as she accepted his posthumous Bronze Star. There was no body to bury, no crash site to visit, just a medal, a folded letter, and a conclusion that still felt unfinished. Later that year, he was officially declared dead. The explanation remained unchanged, lost over the English Channel. Yet the questions endured. Was it weather? Mechanical failure? A tragic navigation error? Friendly fire? Or something still hidden beneath classified silence? Miller had lived a life built on precision, structure, and control, yet his final chapter dissolved into uncertainty. Perhaps that's why the mystery refuses to fade. His music gave people clarity in chaotic times. His disappearance did the opposite. And until physical proof is recovered, Glenn Miller remains suspended between history and legend, forever flying through fog, forever unheard from again. Some stories end with answers. Others end with echoes. This one still echoes.